The morning Michael Carter got his truck inspected for the third time that month, the mechanic handed him back the keys with a look that said everything a man didn't want to hear before 9 in the morning. The exhaust was held together by rust and prayer. The rear left tire was a conversation waiting to end badly. And the check engine light, that little orange sun that had been rising faithfully every day for 2 years, was not a warning anymore so much as a personality trait. Michael thanked the man, climbed back into the cab, and drove the 23 miles to his first job of the day without turning on the radio, because the radio had stopped working in October and it was now February, and somewhere between those 2 months, he had quietly made peace with the silence. He was 38 years old. He had a daughter named Sophie, who was 8, and who drew horses on every surface she could find. He had a toolbox that was better organized than any other part of his life, and he had exactly $112 in his checking account, which was not enough to cover rent, not enough to fix the truck, and not quite enough to stop the specific, low-frequency hum of dread that had become his constant companion since the winter his mother got sick, and the bills started arriving in envelopes, so thick they felt like small books. There had been a wife once. Her name was Diane. And for a while, she had been the kind of woman who made Michael believe that the particular kind of unlucky he had always been was finally, permanently over. They had Sophie together. They had a 2-bedroom apartment with a porch that got afternoon light. They had plans, not extravagant plans, nothing involving yachts or early retirement, just the modest architecture of a life being built by 2 people who believed in each other. Then his mother's diagnosis came, and the medical bills started, and Michael sold everything sellable and still fell behind, and Diane, who had her own fears, her own limits, her own breaking point, packed 2 suitcases on a Thursday morning and said she was sorry in the doorway, in a tone that made it clear she mostly meant it for herself. He did not chase her. He stood in the kitchen holding a coffee cup that had already gone cold and understood, in the particular way that men understand things they cannot change, that the life he had been building was now a construction site with no crew. Sophie was 4 years old. She asked about her mother every night for 11 months. Then she stopped asking. And somehow, that was worse. By the time Sophie was 8, Michael had developed a system. He woke at 5:15, made her lunch peanut butter and honey because she didn't like jelly, banana slices cut thin, a small bag of crackers, left it in the refrigerator with a sticky note that always said something different, sometimes a joke, sometimes a drawing of a stick figure, doing something she'd mentioned, wanting to try. He worked the HVAC repair route from 7 until 3. Sometimes 4, if a unit was being difficult, which they often were because the universe had a sense of humor. Then he picked Sophie up from after-school care, made dinner, helped with homework, read to her until she fell asleep, and then drove for a food delivery app until midnight or 1 in the morning, depending on how the tips were running. He did this 6 days a week. On Sundays, he took Sophie to the park and pretended, quite convincingly, that everything was fine. What the people who knew Michael noticed about him, the neighbors, the regulars on his service route, the dispatcher who gave him the better delivery zones when she could, was that he had not become mean about it. Poverty, sustained long enough, can do things to a person's character that money alone cannot undo. It can make a person small-eyed and suspicious, and preemptively angry, armored against a kindness that might ask something in return. Michael had somehow avoided this. He was still the man who, on a Thursday night with $18 left until his next paycheck, slipped a $5 bill under the door of Mrs. Alvarez next door because she'd mentioned her heat wasn't working, and he knew she was too proud to ask. He was still the man who repaired the ancient window unit at the Garcia's house, 2 blocks over, and refused payment because Mr. Garcia was 81 and on a fixed income, and the July heat was the kind that killed people. He still held doors. He still remembered names. He still, in some fundamental and stubborn way, believed that people were mostly trying their best. Sophie had inherited this. It showed up in her drawings, which were always of animals in groups, herds, flocks, packs, because even at 8 she seemed to understand instinctively that being alone was the condition to be escaped. What Sophie did not tell her father was that 3 boys in her class had started calling her Goodwill Girl because of the sneakers she wore to school, which were 2 sizes too big and had a small marker stain on the left toe. She had scrubbed the stain with soap for 20 minutes one evening before concluding it was permanent. She started wearing her longest socks to cover as much of the shoe as possible. She told herself this was a strategy, not a surrender. On the nights Michael worked late, she would lie in her bed and listen to the sound of the building settling and count the number of nice things that had happened that day, because her father had taught her this exercise, and it worked better than she ever admitted to him, because admitting it worked felt like admitting that things were hard, which felt like a betrayal of his effort to make them not feel hard. They were, in their small and cramped life together, very careful with each other's feelings. It was one of the most tender things about them. Emily Stone did not wake up in the dark. Emily Stone woke up in the kind of penthouse that had automated blinds that rose at whatever hour you programmed. And hers were set for 6:30, and every morning, when the glass cleared, and the city materialized below her towers and bridges, and the particular blue-gray of early light on water she felt, as she had felt for years, completely alone inside. Something that was supposed to feel like success. She was 35 years old. She had built a technology company from a 2-person startup operating out of a converted storage unit in Portland to a firm valued at slightly over $4 billion, which was the kind of number that stopped feeling like a number and started feeling like a weather system, something that moved around you and influenced everything without being fully visible. She had been on the covers of 3 national magazines. She had testified before a Senate subcommittee on data privacy. She had her assistant, her security detail, her board members, her publicist, her personal chef, her therapist, and not one person in her life she was completely certain liked her for reasons unrelated to what she controlled. The men had been the worst of it, not all of them, and she was careful not to let bitterness rewrite history into something tidier than it was. But there had been a pattern. Clear enough, once she'd seen it enough times to recognize its shape, the interest that arrived so quickly. The curiosity about her work that shaded, gradually, into curiosity about her valuation. The man who told her he loved her while they were looking at houses he wanted her to buy. The man who proposed on a rooftop at sunset and, when she said she needed time, immediately hired a lawyer. The publicist who had dated her for 7 months, and during those 7 months, quietly positioned himself as her primary media representative, a conflict of interest she discovered only when a journalist called to confirm the arrangement. She had not cried over any of them. She had simply added them to a ledger she kept in the back of her mind. Not a ledger of bitterness, exactly, but of evidence. Evidence of what it meant to be a woman whose net worth was public knowledge, in a world where net worth was a kind of power, and power was a thing that attracted people who wanted it for themselves. Her assistant, Marcus, had suggested the anonymous dating app as a joke. Emily had laughed. Then spent 20 minutes reading the privacy policy. Then created an account under the name M. Occupation listed as office worker. Photograph taken with her personal phone in the bathroom of her apartment, with the skyline window carefully out of frame. She wore a gray cable-knit sweater she'd found in a box of things she'd kept from college, the kind of sweater that had survived precisely because it was forgettable. No jewelry. Her hair down and unstyled. She looked like herself, and nothing like the woman in the magazine photographs, which was the point. She went on 4 dates over 3 weeks. 3 of them were fine. None of them made her feel anything she hadn't felt before. The 4th one ended when the man recognized her from a Forbes profile and asked, within the first 10 minutes, whether she'd ever considered angel investing in the restaurant industry. The morning she was supposed to meet the 5th man, a guy named Michael. Occupation listed as technician. Divorced. One kid, Marcus, called from the car to say he had accidentally left her actual wallet on the seat of the company SUV, which was currently parked in the garage of the corporate headquarters on the other side of the city. Emily stood in front of her building in the gray sweater and a pair of dark jeans and took stock. She had her personal phone, which was down to 4% battery. She had the transit card in her jacket pocket, which had a little over $2 on it. She had, in the very bottom of the small canvas bag she was using instead of her usual bag, one single dollar bill that had been there so long It had taken on the particular softness of old paper. She did not call a car. She did not call Marcus. She took the subway, which she had not done in over 2 years, and stood in the car and watched the city pass through the windows and felt something she hadn't expected, which was curious. The cafe was called Harbor Light, and it was the kind of place that had been there long enough to be slightly worn in a way that felt honest. The menu was written on a chalkboard. The chairs didn't match. The smell was very good coffee, and something baked that morning. Emily arrived 4 minutes early, and chose a table near the window, and looked at the menu, and did the arithmetic of her financial situation, which was objectively absurd, and also oddly clarifying. She could afford one small drip coffee. She ordered it, and sat with her dying phone and waited. She did not notice immediately that she was $2 short for what she'd ordered, because the amount appeared at the end, and by then she had already drunk half the coffee. When the realization landed, and it landed the way embarrassing things do, all at once, and with physical sensation, she was digging through the canvas bag a second time, as though a credit card might materialize from the nothing she'd already checked twice. The barista, a young woman with patient eyes, watched this process without expression. Emily was considering her options, none of which were good, when she heard a voice say, without any particular ceremony, "I've got it." She looked up. The man standing at the counter was tall, in the way that people who do physical work are often tall, not posed, just substantial. He was wearing a gray uniform shirt with his name on it, which she read before she could stop herself. Michael. He was looking at the menu board, not at her, the way a person looks when they're paying for something without wanting to make a production of it. He paid for both coffees, picked up his cup, and walked to the table adjacent to hers and sat down. That was all. No expectant pause. No waiting for gratitude. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his shirt pocket, a work order. She could see and looked at it. "Thank you," Emily said. "I'll pay you back. I'm having a weird day." Michael looked up. He had a face that had been weathered by something not age exactly, more like sustained effort, and dark eyes that were direct without being aggressive. "Don't worry about it," he said. "It's a few dollars. I know, but I mean it," he said, and his tone was the tone of a man who understood precisely what it felt like to be short a few dollars in a public place. "I've been there." She studied him for a moment. He was already looking back at his work order. "I'm Emily," she said. He looked up again, and this time something shifted slightly in his expression, not a smile yet, more the precursor to one. "Michael," he said. They talked for 2 hours. She would remember this later as one of the stranger facts of her adult life, that she had sat in a coffee shop with a man she had just met, and talked with the kind of ease she associated with people she had known for years. He talked about Sophie with the particular mixture of pride and exhaustion that she had heard in the voices of good parents, the ones who were tired not because they resented the work, but because the work was real and large and constant. He talked about the truck, which he described as an ongoing negotiation. He did not ask her what she did. He did not ask where she lived or what she drove or whether she owned or rented or what her 5-year plan was. He asked her what she liked to eat for breakfast, because they had gotten onto the subject of diners, and the question was so ordinary and genuine that she answered it with her whole attention. "Scrambled eggs," she told him, "with hot sauce." He said that was the correct answer. What struck her, and she turned this over many times in the weeks that followed, was that he was not performing anything. There was no version of himself he was trying to sell her. The man across the table was the same man who had paid for her coffee without making a thing of it, the same man who had a work order folded in his shirt pocket and grease under one fingernail that he had missed when he washed his hands. He was simply there, in the particular way that some people are actually there, and others are only approximately so. When she finally left her phone long dead, the afternoon already dim, he walked with her to the corner and said he'd had a good time, which was not an elaborate declaration, but was clearly true. She said she had too. He said, in a way that was a question without being a question, "Same time next week?" She said yes, before she'd fully decided to. Over the weeks that followed, A life assembled itself around their meetings, in a way that felt accidental and inevitable at once. They ate from a taco truck that parked on Clement Street on Tuesday evenings. They walked in Golden Gate Park on Saturday mornings, Sophie running ahead toward whatever caught her attention: pigeons, a man with 3 dogs, a puddle that was more interesting than any puddle had a right to be. They went to a small county fair in October where Michael won a stuffed bear at the ring toss, with an efficiency that suggested either genuine skill or a misspent youth. And Sophie named the bear Gerald, and Emily carried Gerald for the rest of the afternoon because Sophie's hands were full of cotton candy. Sophie adored Emily in the uncomplicated, total way that children sometimes attach themselves to people who see them clearly. Emily was a person who listened when Sophie talked, which sounds like a small thing and is actually enormous. She asked follow-up questions about the horses Sophie drew, wanted to know their names and whether they were fast and what they ate. And Sophie, who had been used to adults treating her artistic world as charming but unserious, responded to this attention by opening up in ways that visibly startled Michael. One afternoon, Sophie told Emily, in a matter-of-fact tone that carried enormous weight, that she was the nicest person her father had ever brought around, which was technically a comparison set of one, but the sentiment was complete. Emily was experiencing something she did not immediately have a name for. She was experiencing the texture of a life she had never lived, the smallness of it, the kitchen that fit 2 people if they arranged themselves carefully, the negotiations over the remote control, the inside jokes about Sophie's strong opinions regarding ketchup was not a diminishment. It was a specificity. She was not a category in this kitchen. She was not CEO or founder or subject of a profile or person of significant net worth. She was Emily, who liked scrambled eggs with hot sauce, who could not win at ring toss no matter how she adjusted her technique, who had started keeping a small sketchbook in her canvas bag because Sophie had given her one and suggested they draw together. She filled the sketchbook slowly. The drawings were not very good. Sophie told her honestly that the horses needed work. She told Michael she worked in an office. She said it with the vagueness of someone who found their job tedious to explain, which was not untrue, and he did not press her. He talked more than she did, mostly about jobs and Sophie and things he was trying to fix, and she listened and asked questions and stored the details: the name of Sophie's teacher, the saga of the truck's exhaust system, the late Mrs. Alvarez's son who had come to clean out the apartment and left behind a rocking chair that now sat in Michael's hallway with the attention of someone who intended to keep them. There was a dinner in late September that Emily would return to in memory more than any of the others. Michael had made pasta with a sauce from a recipe that had been his mother's, written on a card in handwriting that had faded to near illegibility, which he decoded from habit. The kitchen was barely large enough for 2 adults to exist in simultaneously without negotiating space. And they negotiated it, passing things back and forth over Sophie, who sat at the counter doing homework and providing unsolicited commentary on the sauce's progress. There was no ambient music, no candles, no staging. The overhead light was too bright, and the window over the sink had a draft that Michael had sealed twice, and that had unsealed itself in some private mechanical protest. Emily stood at the counter chopping garlic, and understood that she was the happiest she had been in longer than she could accurately calculate, and this understanding arrived not as a revelation, not as a dramatic shift in the quality of the light, but quietly, in the smell of the kitchen, and the sound of Sophie arguing about whether pasta required more salt. The happiness was so ordinary that it took her several minutes to recognize it as happiness at all. She had spent years in rooms where happiness was performed with intention and expense, where the decor and the service and the company were all curated toward a feeling. This was different. This was the undesigned thing, the thing that happened when no one was trying to manufacture it, and it was the most valuable thing she had encountered in years, more valuable than any acquisition, any headline, any number in any report. Michael noticed, that evening, that she had stopped checking her phone. She had, in the early weeks, checked it compulsively, the quick downward glance, the thumb that moved to unlock even when she immediately locked it again, the way she held it even when she wasn't using it. The way people hold things they feel responsible for. That evening, the phone sat on the counter near the door, and she did not look at it once during the 2 hours they were in the kitchen and at the table, and Michael recognized this as something, though he could not have named precisely what, only that it was the behavior of a person who had, for the length of that dinner, decided that this room was the thing most worth attending to. The first thing Michael noticed was the cars. Not flashy cars, he would have caught that, but good cars, parked in places they shouldn't be, that seemed to relocate when Emily relocated. He told himself he was imagining it. Then there was the evening at the Clement Street restaurant, when the owner, a Vietnamese man named Robert who had never visibly recognized anyone in Michael's presence, looked at Emily and performed a subtle but unmistakable adjustment in his posture, the kind of adjustment people make in the presence of someone whose approval matters. Emily chatted with him easily, in the manner of a person who was accustomed to being recognized and had developed an efficient, warm way of making it mean nothing. Michael watched this and told himself it didn't necessarily mean anything. There was the afternoon in the park when a helicopter circled and then descended toward a landing pad a quarter-mile away, and Emily's phone, which she had stopped letting die since the first meeting, lit up simultaneously with a call she silenced without answering. There were the two men who had been sitting on a bench near the playground for 3 Saturdays running, always in different clothes, always with sight lines to where Sophie played. He had noticed them separately. On the 3rd Saturday he noticed them noticing Emily, and something clicked into place that he immediately pushed back out of place, because the alternative required too much rearrangement. Sophie found the article on a Tuesday afternoon doing homework on Michael's laptop. She was supposed to be researching weather systems for a school project. The article was from a business magazine's website and had been loading in a background tab since Michael had briefly looked at it on his break and closed the lid. The headline was in large type. The photograph was very clear. Sophie looked at the photograph for a long time, then called for her father. Michael came in, read the headline, looked at the photograph, and laughed a short, genuine laugh that was mostly relief. "That's not her," he said. "They just look similar." Sophie looked at the photograph again, then at her father, with the expression of someone who is 8 years old and has, in this precise moment, a better grasp of reality than the adult in the room. Michael closed the laptop. He made dinner. He did not think about it for the rest of the evening, which required a sustained and deliberate effort he did not examine too closely. The hotel was called the Sterling Grand, and Michael had delivered there before. The lobby was the kind of lobby that made you aware of your clothes, high ceilings, marble floors, the kind of ambient light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. He had a delivery of 4 bags for a corporate suite on the 14th floor. He was in the lobby, bag carrier over one shoulder, waiting for the elevator, when the wall-mounted display across the atrium shifted to a new image. A woman in a dark blazer at a podium, the corporate logo of Meridian Group visible behind her, a number in the caption $8 billion, and the name Emily Stone, CEO. The elevator was directly in front of him, but he did not move. He read the caption again. He looked at the photograph. He looked at the caption again. He understood intellectually that he should go upstairs and make his delivery. And he stood with this understanding and did nothing useful with it. The main doors to the hotel opened behind him, and the sound that entered with them, the organized murmur of a security detail, the particular cadence of a group moving with purpose, made him turn before he made the decision to turn. She was wearing a coat he'd never seen. It was a very good coat. There were 4 men with her and a woman with a tablet. She was talking to the woman with the tablet in the clipped, efficient shorthand of a person who spent most of her day being briefed on things. She looked, from the distance of the lobby, the way she always looked, the same face, the same way she moved her hands when she talked, but overlaid now with a context that rearranged every detail he had accumulated. The gray sweater, the $1, the vague mention of office work, Gerald the stuffed bear in his daughter's arms. Emily saw him. He could not have said exactly how he knew she did not visibly react, did not slow her pace, did not stop talking to the woman with the tablet, but there was a fraction of a second in which her eyes met his and then moved away, and in that fraction he felt the temperature of the entire lobby change. He was still holding the delivery bags. He set them down on the marble floor with a care that was probably inappropriate to the moment, and walked out through the main doors, and stood on the sidewalk in the cold without a coat, and stood there for a long time looking at nothing. She called 4 times. He did not answer. She texted twice long texts, the kind that take time to write, and he read them standing in his kitchen at 11:30 at night while Sophie was asleep. And he felt the texts more than he read them, felt the shape of what they were trying to say, and then set the phone face down on the counter and went to bed and did not sleep. The thing he returned to, over and over in the following days, was not the money. He wanted to be honest with himself about this. In the quiet of the truck on long drives between jobs, and honesty required, admitting that his pride was wounded in ways that had nothing to do with financial comparison. He was not ashamed of what he did or what he earned. He had put Sophie through a winter on those earnings. He had sat with his mother in a hospital for 11 weeks on those earnings. He was not looking for rescue. What he could not locate a comfortable shelf for was the specific shape of the deception the way Emily had been. In some sense, watching him be poor without telling him she could end it with a phone call, the way he had confided in her, with the unguarded candor he only extended to people he trusted. And she had received all of it while withholding the most basic fact about who she was. It was not the wealth. It was the distance, the careful maintenance of a gap between what he was seeing and what was real. He did not call her back for 10 days. In those 10 days, Sophie asked about Emily 3 times, each time with an escalating specificity that suggested she understood more about the situation than she'd been told. On the 3rd time, she was direct in the manner of children who have decided that indirectness is inefficient. "Did you break up with her because she has more money than us?" she asked. They were eating soup. Michael put his spoon down. "It's more complicated than that," he said. Sophie considered this. "Is it, though?" she said, and returned to her soup, with the finality of someone who has made their position clear. Michael drove his roots in those 10 days, with the particular silence of a man processing something he hadn't decided how to process. He thought about his mother, which was not directly connected, but was also not unconnected the way she had told him. In the last weeks, when the hospital had become her permanent address, that the only thing that scared her about dying was the idea that he would use it as proof that life was mostly loss. She had known him well enough to identify that risk. He had spent years since her death being careful not to prove her right. Being the man who held doors and tipped well and fixed things for neighbors who couldn't pay, because those were the actions of a person who still believed in the basic goodwill of things. And now he was sitting in his truck at a red light on Geary Street, thinking about Emily Stone and trying to figure out where the betrayal ended, and his own fear of being seen, of being the smaller thing in the room, began. It was not a comfortable place to sit. He sat in it anyway, because honesty had always been the one practice he could not give up, and honesty required admitting that some part of his anger was not about the lie but about the distance it implied, the way she had stood on the other side of a gap she'd built, looking at him, and he hadn't known the gap was there. Emily sat in the penthouse for 3 evenings in a row and did something she had not done in years, which was nothing. She did not work. She did not answer the board members' messages about the quarterly projections. She did not return her publicist's call about the feature in the technology magazine. She sat on the couch where the automated blinds cleared at 6:30 and watched the city and let herself feel the specific grief of having found something real, and then watched it walk out of a hotel lobby carrying a bag of someone else's takeout food. She had cried in her adult life over 2 things: the death of her father and a conversation with her first serious investor, who had told her the company would never work and that she should go back to school. She cried now for a 3rd thing, and it surprised her with its intensity, the way things only surprise you when you have not admitted to yourself how much they mattered. She had Marcus drive her to Michael's neighborhood on the 4th day. She sat in the car on the block and watched the building for 20 minutes, and then told Marcus to take her home. Because arriving unannounced was wrong, and she knew it, and everything she might say on a sidewalk outside his building was wrong in the same fundamental way. What she needed was not proximity. What she needed was to give him the actual truth, without strategy, without the careful framings she applied to professional difficult conversations, just the plain version of why she had done what she had done, delivered as plainly as she was capable of delivering it. They met on neutral ground, at a coffee shop neither of them had been to before, on a Saturday morning when Sophie was at a birthday party. Emily arrived first. She was wearing the gray cable-knit sweater, which was not calculated, and was also, she recognized, not uncalculated. Michael arrived 10 minutes later and sat down across from her and looked at her with a measured expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and was not quite managing it. Which meant something, and she held on to that. She told him about the men. Not as victims, she refused the performance of victimhood even now, but as a pattern she had spent years building walls against, a pattern that had made the anonymous experiment feel not like deception but like protection. She told him about the one who had proposed at sunset and immediately called a lawyer. She told him about the publicist. She told him that the first time Michael had paid for her coffee and then just sat down and read his work order without waiting for anything in return, she had felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost stopped believing it existed, which was safety. "I just wanted to know," she said. "I needed to know that someone could want to be near me before they knew what being near me was worth. And I know I know how it sounds, but it was the only way I knew how to find out." Michael was quiet for a long time. He turned his coffee cup in a slow circle with both hands. "I understand why you did it," he said finally. "I do. I just wish he stopped." He started again. "I talk to you about things I don't talk to people about. That's not, I don't do that lightly." "I know," she said. "And the whole time, you were deciding whether I was—" "No," she said. "No, that's not what it was. I wasn't testing you, Michael. I was scared, and then I wasn't scared anymore, and then I was too far in to know how to come back." He nodded slowly. The coffee cup completed its slow rotation. Outside the window, a woman walked a dog that was wearing a small sweater, and they both watched it pass without commenting on it. "I have to think," he said. "Okay," she said. "I'm not saying no," he said. Which was not the same as saying yes, but was, she thought, the most honest thing anyone had said to her in years. She stood to leave. She picked up her bag. She looked at him once more and said, simply, "I'm sorry. I really am." Then she walked out, and he sat at the table alone with his coffee and the slow rotation of feeling things settle into new positions, like furniture rearranged in a room you've lived in long enough that any change feels like the wrong change, and also like the only possible change, both at once. He was reaching for his keys 20 minutes later when his phone rang. The number on screen was Sophie's school, which was wrong because it was a Saturday. And then he registered the number was Sophie's friend, Maya's mother, and her voice on the other end was the particular careful voice of a parent who is trying not to alarm you and therefore is alarming you. Sophie had left the birthday party an hour ago and said she was getting something from the car, and she had not come back. Maya's mother had checked the car. No Sophie. They had walked the block twice. No Sophie. Michael was in his truck in 45 seconds. He drove to the party address and confirmed what was true, and drove the surrounding blocks with the systematic thoroughness of a man trying to use procedure to manage something that procedure was not equipped to manage, which was the specific terror of a missing child. He called her cell phone the prepaid phone he'd gotten her for emergencies, and it rang and went to voicemail, and he called it again and again and again. He pulled over outside a pharmacy and sat with both hands on the wheel and took 3 measured breaths and then called Emily, because he did not fully understand why he called Emily, except that some part of him had not stopped trusting her even when he believed he had. She answered on the first ring. He told her in 2 sentences. There was a pause of perhaps 3 seconds, and then she said, "Stay where you are. I'm calling this in now." He heard the shift in her voice, not the Emily of the coffee shop, something faster and harder, and then she was gone, and he sat in his truck outside the pharmacy and gripped the wheel and waited. What happened in the next 40 minutes was, he learned afterward, a mobilization of resources that would have taken the city's public services several hours. A private security network with access to commercial camera feeds across 12 square miles, a team of 6 deployed immediately. A data analyst cross-referencing transit card pings against Sophie's known card number, which Emily had quietly memorized months ago from the laminated card in Sophie's backpack, without mentioning it, and without any purpose that could be called anything other than caring about someone's child. 22 minutes after Michael's call, Emily's phone rang. Sophie had taken the 41 bus to the end of its line, which terminated at the Central Transit Station, and had been located at a coffee shop near the main concourse. Sitting at a table with a cup of hot chocolate she had apparently explained to the barista she would pay for as soon as her dad arrived. Michael drove to the transit station at a speed inconsistent with posted limits. Emily's car arrived 30 seconds after his. Sophie was at the table in her party clothes, a dress with small yellow flowers, now slightly rumpled with her hot chocolate. Looking not frightened but very, very serious in the way children look when they have done something whose consequences they are prepared to accept. She looked at her father, and then at Emily standing behind him, and her expression shifted into something that was relief and satisfaction in equal, complicated measure. "I wanted to make sure she was still here," Sophie said. Which was not an explanation that explained anything except everything. Michael crouched down in front of his daughter and looked at her for a moment, with an expression that was too full to be only one thing, then pulled her into his arms and held her with the particular tightness of a parent who has spent 40 minutes imagining the alternative. Over Sophie's shoulder, he could see Emily, who was standing a few feet away, still in her coat, her hands at her sides, watching with an expression that was trying to hold itself together and not entirely succeeding. She had mobilized a small infrastructure project to find an 8-year-old girl who had ridden a city bus alone because she did not want two people she loved to stop seeing each other. There was no professional calculus in that. There was no cost-benefit analysis. There was just a woman who had been scared for someone else's child for 40 minutes and had done everything she was capable of doing and was now standing in a transit station coffee shop with the controlled breathing of someone who has not yet fully come down from the fear. Michael stood up from his daughter. He looked at Emily across the small distance of the coffee shop. He crossed it. He said, "I don't care who you are. I mean, I care. But it's not the part that matters." Emily said nothing. Her expression had changed in a way that was difficult to describe without reference to the specific quality of someone who has braced for a blow and received something else entirely. "The part that matters," Michael said, "is that you spent 40 minutes in a panic over my kid. And you didn't do it because someone was watching, and you didn't do it for any reason I can name except that you love her, and that he stopped. He started again. That's the only credential I ever needed." Sophie, still holding her hot chocolate, looked between them with the expression of someone who has successfully executed a plan. She would later deny that it was a plan. No one believed her. They walked out of the transit station together in the cold. The three of them, Sophie between the two adults and holding both their hands, which she had engineered by simply taking both hands simultaneously, before anyone could make a different arrangement. The city moved around them with its usual indifference to small private moments, and they walked through it and talked about nothing consequential, what to have for dinner, whether Gerald the stuffed bear could accompany Sophie to school as an emotional support item. The ongoing situation with the truck's exhaust and the conversation was ordinary in a way that felt, to both Michael and Emily, like exactly the right kind of extraordinary. A year passed, with the particular speed of years that are being lived fully. Michael opened his own HVAC and appliance repair company, Carter Mechanical, with the help of a business loan that he had applied for through a small business program and received through that program, not knowing and not asking whether Emily had made any calls on his behalf. And Emily had made no calls on his behalf. Had in fact specifically instructed Marcus to ensure that no calls were made, because Michael Carter's success was going to be Michael Carter's success, or it was not going to mean what she needed it to mean. He hired 2 technicians. He printed business cards. Sophie designed the logo, which featured a small cartoon sun with a wrench, which Michael used without modification. Emily, for her part, had a conversation with her board about the importance of work-life integration that surprised several of them in its sincerity. She made fewer 12-hour days. She attended Sophie's school play, in which Sophie played the back half of a horse. She learned, slowly, to play ring toss at a level that Michael described as significantly less embarrassing than before. She moved some of her personal things to Michael's apartment in stages so gradual that the transition was never announced. just quietly completed, until one morning she woke up, and the automated blinds in the penthouse were a memory, and the window in Michael's bedroom showed a fire escape and a slice of the neighbor's roof, and she lay in the early light and listened to Sophie moving around in the kitchen making toast, badly, and felt something she recognized now because she had felt it before in that coffee shop, that particular clarifying calm of being exactly where she was supposed to be. On a Thursday evening in October, the same month as the county fair, 1 year later, which was either coincidence or Michael's idea of poetry, he took Emily and Sophie back to Harbor Light Cafe. It was early enough that they had the window table. Michael had Sophie on his left and Emily on his right, and the chalkboard menu overhead and the smell of good coffee. Sophie was drawing horses in her sketchbook. Emily was telling them about a meeting that had gone badly, and then unexpectedly, well, which was her favorite kind of meeting. Michael listened with the particular attention he gave to things that mattered to him, which was all the attention he had. He put a small object on the table between them. Emily looked at it. It was a ring, not a large ring, not an ostentatious ring. A simple band with a small stone that caught the cafe light in a way that was honest rather than spectacular, which was, she thought, exactly right. Sophie looked up from her horses, and then looked at her father, and then looked at Emily, with the expression of someone who has been aware of this plan for some time, and is professionally maintaining plausible deniability. "I know you could buy anything," Michael said. "I know you could buy this whole building if you wanted to. I know that what I can offer you is not by most measurements the most impressive offer on the table." He said this without apology, in the matter-of-fact tone he used for true things. "But I'll always pay the check. I'll always pick up when you call. I'll show up when something breaks, which will be often, because things break. And I'll never need you to be the CEO. I just need you to be Emily." He paused. "Do you want to figure out the rest of it together?" Emily looked at the ring for a moment. Then she looked at Michael. Then she looked at Sophie, who had abandoned all pretense and was watching them with her sketchbook held against her chest and her eyes very wide. "I have a lot more than $1 this time," Emily said. Michael smiled. "I'll still cover the check." She said yes. Sophie made a sound that was not quite a word, but contained several emotions organized in ascending order of happiness. The cafe moved on around them, orders placed, coffees made, conversations begun and continued, and at the table by the window, a man who fixed things for a living, and a woman who built things from nothing, and a child who drew horses in groups, sat together in the particular warmth of a life that had not been planned, and was, for that reason, exactly what they needed. There is a version of this story in which the money matters, in which the distance between $4 billion and a checking account with $112 in it cannot be bridged without someone losing something essential, their pride, their independence, the story they tell about themselves. There is a version in which the deception is unforgivable, or the class gap is insurmountable, or Sophie stays the back half of a horse forever and everyone moves on. This is not that version. This is the version in which Michael Carter stood in a hotel lobby and felt his world rearrange itself, and walked back into it anyway, because the alternative was walking away from the first thing in years that had felt genuinely real. This is the version in which Emily Stone sat in a too-quiet penthouse and understood, finally, that safety is not something you build with walls. It is something that happens when you let someone in who proves, by their specific and daily and unremarkable actions, that they intend to stay. This is the version with Sophie's horse drawings pinned to the refrigerator, and Gerald the bear on the second shelf of the bookcase, and a truck that still runs better as a negotiation than as a vehicle, and a ring that catches the cafe light honestly, and two people who found each other in a coffee shop when one of them had exactly $1 and the other had just enough faith to find out what that meant. The camera pulls back from the table and through the window into the cold October evening. And the three of them are still visible through the glass, still talking, still laughing at something Sophie has said, and the city moves around them with its usual vast indifference, and none of that indifference touches them at all.